Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to discuss The Hindu newspaper dated 10th of August 2020. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let's now begin the discussion.
This article, when COVID-19 forced governments to step up, appears on Jacket. That is the page even before the page number 1 of The Hindu. Now usually we don't cover Jacket because it contains advertisements. But today The Hindu has decided to lay special emphasis or focus on various steps which are being taken by southern states in trying to tackle COVID-19 pandemic. Now from the perspective of GS1, GS2, GS3 as well as GS4, it becomes important for us to understand that how different state governments evolve their policies in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. Although direct question on these policies and schemes of various state governments in the mains examination is highly unlikely. But having a good idea as to how these state governments are evolving their mechanisms will make it easier for you to critically analyze the steps taken by the central government. Also, it will help you in suggesting measures in form of case studies. Also, it is time for us to look at these schemes and policies from the perspective of federalism. As you know that currently the government is laying special emphasis on competitive as well as cooperative federalism. Now starting with competitive federalism. So competitive federalism is a concept where the center competes with the states and states compete with center, and also the states compete among each other in matters of policy, development, reforms, etc. So first you start with federalism where you devolve and constitutionally devolve legislative and executive powers to the regional territories or the states, and then you say that it is not possible to govern the whole country on single model. And once you allow the states to evolve their own policies according to their own needs and situations, each state will design their own policies for development of the state. So COVID-19 pandemic and its handling is one of the biggest challenges which has been handled by our administrative setup in past many decades. And hence, how various states are coming up with different kinds of policies and its analysis is an important ingredient of competitive federalism. Because if one or the other state is coming up with a very innovative policy, it will help other state because other state want to improve themselves and they are learning among themselves. And if that step is so awesome, even center can adopt that. In the past also center has learned a lot from the states and has emulated a lot of schemes which were earlier run by the states. So can you name some of the central initiatives, schemes, policies and even laws which are well motivated from states? Please let us know in the comment section. And hence we have compiled the major initiatives taken by the 5 southern states. And while going through these, we'll also highlight some of the unique steps which you can also suggest and central government can also adopt them. Going counterclockwise starting from Karnataka. So starting with the steps taken for the workers of unorganized sector or informal sector. Now, as you know that these are special people who don't have any kind of social security or protection. For example, people who are selling flowers and fruits, weavers and auto drivers. And the Karnataka government has issued 2,272 crores for their relief in form of cash disbursement. Then similarly, people involved in small businesses have been given the relaxation in the fixed charge of electricity. So they will not pay this component of the electricity bill for many months to come. Then all loans issued by the cooperative banks and all loans issued to fishermen have been waived off, completely waived off, taken over by the state government, just like the agricultural loans. Then we know that Karnataka and the cities of Karnataka, especially Bengaluru, is a place with a lot of migrants and many of them poor. So it is important to ensure adequate food supply to them because you know that still there is no concept of interstate portability of ration cards, and hence the state government has ensured that all migrant families be entitled to the same benefits as the BPL families of Karnataka are eligible. So they will be treated on par with the residents of Karnataka. So these are some of the very good steps taken by the Karnataka government. Let's now move on to the Kerala government steps. Obviously, starting with the distribution of food, free ration and grocery kits to all ration card holders were issued. Then community kitchens opened by local bodies and Kudumbashri food, Kudumbashri, which is an SHG and a topic of discussion in itself, provided free of cost food to those living in quarantine centers as well as approaching these centers. So these community kitchens have already been analyzed in our DNS. You can go and watch that video. But this is one of the unique steps taken by the Kerala government. Now this next step is very important because the Kerala government has announced moratorium on all pending taxes, rents and dues for shops and buildings owned by local bodies. So this will come out as a big relief for small and local businesses. Then as you know that Kerala has a special aspect of large number of expatriates, people especially who work in Gulf region, and now they are returning back. And many of them are returning without any savings. And hence Kerala government has announced rupees 5,000 to each expat who has lost her job or who is unable to return to the country where she was working. As you know that due to the lockdown, most people or majority of them are staying back at home, and hence it has led to shot up in the electricity tariff. And this is a big problem across the country. And hence the Kerala government has announced that up to 50% will be reduced in the additional power incurred by household during the lockdown period. So first, Kerala government will look at their pre-lockdown electricity bills. And whatever is extra on top of that during lockdown period, 50% of that will be waived off.
Let us now move on to the Tamil Nadu.
So even before the COVID pandemic began, Amma canteens or Amma Unavagam have been the highlighting feature of the way Tamil Nadu has been providing food to the needy people. Earlier they used to charge some paltry amounts, but now they have made it absolutely free of cost for all people. So this is one of the highlighting feature of the steps taken by the Tamil Nadu government. Then they have come up with this unique idea of quarantine allowance or cash support of 1,000 rupees for all those people who have been institutionally quarantined, because once you're quarantined you can't be involved in income generating activity, and hence there is a need for compensation. Then Tamil Nadu government has also issued directives to all the private schools not to force families and parents for the payment of the fees until the directive is taken back. Although it cannot be clearly stated that whether this is a step in right direction or not, because now the private schools have come under great financial stress and many of them are even considering of closing down the operation. But nonetheless, it is a step. Now on one hand, Kerala has waived a decent amount of loans and taxes. Tamil Nadu government has deferred the payment of these taxes and loans by around 3 to 6 months depending upon the criteria of loans and taxes. Then comes a very innovative step taken by the Tamil Nadu government, which is the distribution of electronic devices to the sections of the poor people. For example, tablets and smartphones. Now, if you remember that we have covered in our DNS the current data on how many families and students have access to internet or access to these electronic devices. And mainly due to inaccessibility to these resources, education in the COVID times have been impacted a lot, and hence this innovative step has been taken by Tamil Nadu government. Then moving on to Andhra Pradesh, it has given directives to schools and it has also asked all the land and property owners to defer the payment of the rent. And then finally moving on to Telangana. Here the government has ensured card portability for its residents. Now this has enabled people to draw their monthly quota of essentials irrespective of their location, and also it has ensured free food to all the migrant workers as well. Now the 12 kg rice has been ensured for local people, 10 kg of rice has been ensured for interstate migrants living in the cities of Hyderabad. So once we have discussed all these initiatives, few of the ones which stand out clearly are relief for unorganized sector by Karnataka government, the step of community kitchen, moratorium on all pending taxes and compensation to expats by Kerala, distribution of electronic devices to poor families for education, quarantine allowance and Amma canteens or Amma Anavagam and card portability by Telangana government. So these are the steps which you can mention wherever you have to talk about various kinds of innovative steps which are taken by state governments in order to meet the challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic. This article, LAC Complicates India's Options, appears on page number 10. Now, as we all know, that threat from China is bringing about drastic changes in the way India perceives its foreign relations. And two of the most prominent changes have been India is increasingly coming closer to US, and also there is a genesis of Quad or Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. So in this regard, article analyzes these two developments and then puts forth the statement of various foreign analysts as well as prominent Indian thinkers to suggest that these two developments are not a reliable option for India. So first we'll understand the events which lead us to suggest that India is indeed growing closer to US. So as India and China confront each other across Himalayas, it also clearly appears to have driven India and United States closer. And let us see how. So in the recent past, the two nations have conducted joint military exercises and seem to have been in regular contact, including related to Sino-Indian confrontation. What is more surprising is a series of high-profile statements from senior US officials and lawmakers which have clearly and outrightly supported India. This is a marked shift from US strategy in 2017 during Doklam crisis, where none of the high-profile officials of US government came out with a statement clearly supporting India. It is also possible that during that time, that is 2 years ago during Doklam crisis, India did not want any public expressions of US support, but now both sides have given that apprehension. Also, the governments at the highest level, that is US President and our Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi, their Defense Secretary and our Raksha Mantri, they have been in constant touch with each other and there have been multiple phone calls in the days preceding as well as succeeding the clashes at our line of actual control. As far as the international forums are concerned, America has also now clearly come out in support of India. Consider this proposal of expansion of G7 put out by Mr. Trump. Now he suggested that G7 be extended to include Australia, India and South Korea. Whereas currently China is not a member of G7, but in the reform agenda of US, China was not included. Then in context of India's action of banning 59 Chinese apps, United States of America came out totally in support of India, and it also issued an official statement saying that America has always insisted the risk that emanates from China, Chinese telecommunication infrastructure, and hence the decision of India to ban several Chinese software firms from operating inside of the country is a right decision. Also in the last week you must have seen the efforts by leading American software companies for acquisition of business of TikTok in North America. That is the kind of pressure which the US officials themselves are building on TikTok. So these are the recent statements and events which suggest a deep convergence emerging between India and United States of America. But there are two reasons to suggest that US will not go as far as to militarily support India in its confrontation with China. And the first reason is, it is clear that India is not going to enter into any kind of military alliance or a system of collective defense with America. It has already refused to put boots on the ground in case of Afghanistan, which Trump has already requested many times to India. And US on the other hand has always proceeded with the idea of collective defense. Best example being NATO, which works on the philosophy of collective security, which is a security arrangement in which each state in the system accepts that the security of one is the concern of all and therefore commits to a collective response to threats to any one of them. And unless and until India commits that level of engagement with the United States of America, US will clearly not enter into rescue. And the second important reason because of which United States of America is unlikely to come to the rescue of India is that US is already withdrawing from Afghanistan after around 20 years of war. And Afghanistan is a very small and insignificant country. And Trump has also clearly stated that USA is not going to get involved into the confrontations across the globe. And hence, it is unlikely that USA will get involved in another continental war. So these were the arguments which suggest that although the relationship between India and US is growing stronger, USA cannot be relied upon in India's confrontation with China. Let's now move to the second development which is also very important, and that is Quad or Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. So Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which consists of India, Japan, Australia and USA. Now this development of Quad is not new. In fact, it has been conceptualized 10 years ago. But there was a lack of activity and cohesiveness in these countries. And as soon as China started to assert itself more aggressively, especially in South China Sea, the conception of Quad has become more real. Now these countries, they say that they are committed to deepening cooperation which rests on a foundation of shared democratic values and principles. Now it is not difficult to see that all these countries have a sound tradition of democracy. So this group is not only economically very sound, but also militarily India and United States are powerful enough to contain China. But there are issues in that also. According to observers, geography matters, and the main flashpoint of India and China is in the deeper continental regions. Whereas if you look at the Quad formation, it is more of a maritime in nature. And hence, if the flashpoint would have occurred in Indian Ocean region or India-Pacific or Indo-Pacific region or in Central Pacific region, Quad could have been a reliable platform to counter that Chinese aggression. But since the flashpoint between India and China is inside the land, there is not much hope and expectation from Quad. And secondly, the actions taken by the Trump have dented the interest of the members of the Quad themselves. For example, the unilateral walking out of United States after the Trump entered into the presidential office from TPP or Trans-Pacific Partnership hurt the cause of not only Australia but also Japan, both of which then moved on to enter into RCP dominated by ASEAN and China. And second is protectionist policies being followed by Trump is hurting not just Japan and Australia but also India. And the third important reason why there is not much hope from Quad is that it is very difficult to counter One Belt One Road initiative of China. And it is surrounded by countries all of which are highly indebted to China. And they are totally engulfed into Chinese machinations of control over Asia and Africa. And then finally, India's hostile neighborhood. If you see, on one hand, we are surrounded by hostile China and Pakistan, whereas Iran, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka as well as Russia are now growing increasingly closer to China. Now in the likelihood of any war, the countries of the Quad will take a lot of time to respond even if they have the will to respond. But on the other hand, India will immediately face the threat of two-front war, on one side from Pakistan and from another side China. So ultimately it can be said that India will have to rely on its own economy as well as geostrategy to resolve this situation with China. And if India is thinking of relying on US and Quad, then it is not a good policy. So the heavy rainfall in state of Kerala has led to devastating landslide in Idukki district of Kerala, leading to death of more than 20 people. And also according to Geological Survey of India, about 0.42 million square kilometer, that is around 13% of the land area in our country currently is prone to landslide hazards. So from the perspective of UPSC examination, disaster management under GS paper 3 encompasses the topic of landslides. Also, it can be asked in GS paper 1. Hence, it is important to discuss this from the static point of view. So we'll start by mass movements. Now, as far as the definition is concerned, any kind of movement of earth material like rock, soil, or even vegetation down the slope
under the influence of gravity is known as mass movement. There is no other definition to it. The movement should be of earth material and it should be due to the force of gravity and no other force. Now, as far as the movement of the material is concerned, it can fall, it can topple, it can slide, it can also flow. But as long as it is flowing in the downward direction or along the slope, it will be called as mass movement and it will remain a cause of concern for us. So if this is a part of a slope, then ultimately what will decide the movement of the mass is the slope or the angle of the slope. The steeper this angle gets, the easier it will be for the mass to move, and the flatter or the horizontaler it gets, it will be difficult for the mass to move because the impact of the gravity will decline as this slope moves towards horizontal. And the second factor is the strength of the material. So as long as there is a strong binding among the material contained in this rock surface, the movement will be difficult. But as soon as the factors which reduce the strength or which increase the weakness of these rock surfaces, the movement of the mass will increase. And hence all the causes of mass movements can be segregated into these two kinds. So starting with the geological factors, you obviously can think of the presence of weak and sensitive as well as weathered material will easily cause a mass movement. Along with that, presence of a lot of joints or fractures or fissures in the rocks will make it very easy not only to weather the rock but also its downward movement. As far as morphological factors are concerned, higher tectonic activity generally leads to higher rates of landslides or mass movements. Higher tectonic activity leads to higher earthquakes, which then weaken the slope and hence induce mass movements. Also, erosion and degradation are also a major factor in inducing mass movements. Now you might ask that how is erosion responsible for causing mass movements? So let us now consider this surface or a side of a mountain, and if a river is flowing across this surface, then it will keep on eroding the side walls of the valley, because of which the slope will become steeper, and as the slope becomes steeper, we have discussed, it will lead to the collapse of this surface, which is nothing but the mass movement. And as the influence of man on nature is increasing, the role being played by anthropogenic factors are also increasing, and hence excavation of a slope and mining are one of the major factors which lead to landslides in current scenario, and also deforestation, because dense forests and their roots keep the material bound and prevent it from collapsing. So all the mass movements can be categorized into various kinds. Start with the falls, which is basically quite abrupt movement of materials that become detached from steep slopes or cliffs. Then comes the creep, which is very slow and steady downslope movement of soil or rock, which is often indicated by slow but persistent tilting of trees or poles and other such vertical objects, because the top layer of the soil has been continuously sliding downwards. Then comes the debris flow, which is a rapid mass movement in which loose soils or rocks and other organic matter combine with water to form slurry that then flows downslope. Then comes the mud flow, which is also rapidly flowing mass, but it has a lot of water content much higher than the debris flow. And finally, solifluction, which is the slow flow of saturated soil downslope, which is often associated with melting of ice in permafrost or in hilly regions. So let us now focus on landslide prone areas in our country. So as we have highlighted before, Geological Survey of India has already declared around 13% or 12.6% of our land area as landslide prone region. And the major landslide prone areas in India include Western Ghats, including Tamil Nadu and Kerala, Karnataka, Goa and Maharashtra. Eastern Ghats, and this is Araku Valley or Araku region in Andhra Pradesh. It is famous for something else. Please try to recall why it came into news in last 1 or 2 years. Then of course Northeast Himalayas and also Northwestern Himalayas. Let us now talk about the impact of landslides. And those can be segregated into short-run as well as long-term impacts. So as far as the short-term impacts of landslides are concerned, In the immediate aftermath of landslides, there is an immense loss and damage to property as well as loss of lives if there is a settlement in the area impacted due to landslides. Then, of course, destruction to agriculture crops, damage to vegetation, obstruction of vehicular movement due to the damage to the infrastructure are some of the negative impacts immediately after a landslide. But if we talk about long-term consequences, in the long run, landslide leads to a lot of discharge of sediments into the river, which then increases the sediment load and which slows down the flow of the river, causing floods. It reduces the effective life of hydroelectric and multi-purpose projects by adding an enormous amount of silt load to the reservoirs. And because of this silting, the capacity of the reservoirs decrease drastically, and hence they have to be cleaned on a regular basis. Then obviously loss of cultivable land. Also during the landslide, usually the top layer of the soil is destroyed, and hence its environmental as well as anthropogenic consequences are much larger. Also in the aftermath of a landslide, the area becomes inhabitable, and hence usually the population in that area has to migrate to some other region, and hence it requires a large rehabilitation efforts. And finally, you can say that this is a geographical or economic impact, which is frequent disruption of transport networks leads to geographical isolation and hence perpetuates underdevelopment, because no capitalist or investor would like to start a business in a region which is frequently cut off from the markets. The PDF notes also contain NDMA guidelines for landslide disaster management, which suggest measures on how to control landslides. It is advised that you go through them. So this particular article, A Latecomer's Guide to Face Mask, appear on page number 2. Now this is something which we all have been doing since last 4 to 5 months. And hence it becomes important for us to understand that whenever we hear someone recommending N95 masks for prevention against COVID-19, what does this N and what does this 95 means? So this article actually dwells into these issues. It is very, very important from the perspective of prelims examination to understand these N, P and R, as well as what does the coefficient followed by this alphabet means, for example 100, 99 and 95. So in this regard, first the article talks about why is it important to wear face mask. So obviously we all know that masks are worn to prevent the transmission of novel coronavirus and in fact all other pathogens, may it virus and bacteria, from you if you have it and from others if they have it. Now the question arises that if everyone is wearing mask, is it important for us to wear mask? Because ultimately if coronavirus cannot be transmitted from other persons, we will not get infected. But researches have emerged which suggest that aerosol transmission of COVID-19 cannot be ruled out. And hence, especially in closed settings or indoor scenario, and particularly in those indoor locations which are extremely crowded and inadequately ventilated, and if one of the infected persons coughs or sneezes, then the aerosol inside the room have the ability to carry COVID-19 for a very, very long time. And hence, it is very, very important to wear mask at all the times. So now let us focus on these designations as to what these terms like N, R and P mean. So these alphabet basically denote the kind of environment in which it is recommended that these masks should be worn. So N denotes no oil is present in the air. So it is very, very ideal mask to be worn in situations where the air does not contain the oil droplets. And these are the kinds of masks designed for poultry cleaning or logging, which is a very, very high virus or dust load environment, but the presence of oil is minimal. Whereas R and P both are the masks which are recommended where a lot of oil droplets might be present in the environment. Now you might ask that what is the difference between R and P? In an environment where a lot of oil droplets are present in the air, these R masks cannot be reused and can be only used for a continuous time of 8 hours. Whereas P mask can be reused, but you will have to follow the manufacturer's time use limitation before reusing them. So for example, if the manufacturer recommends its reuse after 10 hours, then you should follow those guidelines. But R masks cannot be reused. And then all these three N, R and P are associated with numerals 100, 99 and 55. And these numerals are known as efficiency ratings. So basically these numbers denote the percentage up to which these masks are capable of filtering the air. 100 means the filter is expected to trap 99.97%. So practically 100% of the particles can be filtered by N100. Similarly, N99 can filter or trap up to 99% of the particles, and N95 can trap 95% of the particles. Now the article also goes into details of surgical masks, which are 3-ply masks, which means that they carry 3 layers. The first layer or the outermost layer is a non-woven fabric blocking droplets, whereas the second layer, which is a melt-blown fabric, which blocks and absorbs the particles, and finally the third layer, which is a non-woven fabric which absorbs the moisture. So in case of COVID, it is not recommended for you to wear surgical masks if you are not in an operation theater. Now nowadays a new kind of mask has come into the market that is being sold by the name of antiviral masks, which are quite different from N, R and P masks. Now these are the masks that have finish of an antiviral coating, which is based on nanotechnology. So the outer layer uses the metals like silver or copper, which have the ability to kill a virus. So from the perspective of prelims examination, especially in science and technology sections, these designations and these differences are very, very important. The article PM launches Farm Infra scheme appears on page number 9. So if you remember, the finance minister had announced 11 measures specific to Indian agriculture as a part of Atmanirbhar Bharat. And one of the most important measure was related to setting up of agricultural marketing infrastructure fund to improve the overall marketing infrastructure. And this article highlights that PM Modi has recently launched the fund through video conferencing. So let us now discuss few things about Agri Infra Fund. So the government has unveiled 1 lakh crore worth of Agri Infra Fund to improve the farm gate infrastructure such as collection centers, storage and cold chain infrastructures. This fund would provide necessary funding support to primary agricultural cooperative societies, farmers producer organizations or acronymed as FPOs, agriculture entrepreneurs, startups, etc. to invest in post-harvest management infrastructure. So the focus of this Agri Infra Fund is going to be about the post-harvest infra. So all loans under this financing facility will have interest subvention of 3% per annum up to the limit of 2 crores. So all loans availed under this scheme, the interest will be subsidized by up to 3% for the loan amount of up to 2 crores. The credit guarantee coverage will be available for eligible borrowers from this financing facility under Credit Guarantee Fund Trust for Micro and Small Enterprises scheme for a loan up to 2 crores. So there are two kinds of facilities being provided. On one hand, government is providing interest subvention, and on the other hand, it is also providing the credit guarantee. And the duration of the scheme shall be from 2020 to 2029, that is for 10 years.
Next article appears as a column on page number 6, Safety Deficit. Now you must have heard and read a lot about the tragic crash of Air India Express Vande Bharat, which was a relief flight coming to Kozhikode, in which 18 people including 2 crew members lost their lives and many were left severely injured. So due to this particular incident, tabletop runways have again come into limelight. So what are these tabletop runways?
So tabletop runways are generally constructed by chopping off the top of a hill and are often thought of as tricky for landing because of the lack of any margin for overshooting the runway. According to most pilots, landing on tabletop runways requires precision approach with little to no room for errors, because the hills on which the airstrip is constructed is surrounded by deep cliffs.
and if your speed and angle at the time of landing is not within a very narrow range, then the likelihood of overshooting of strip increases manifold. And this is what happened in the case of Kozhikode, where the plane overshot the length of the airstrip and fell into the cliff. Also, one of the troubles is that while approaching the airstrip, the runway appears to be on contiguously leveled land despite the drop ahead, leading to quite an optical illusion. And without much a margin, it's easy to overshoot the runway. So at the same time, let us have a look at what are the other cities or towns which have similar tabletop runways. And usually you will find them in hilly areas, starting with Kullu and Shimla. Lengpui Airport, or also the airport meant for Aizawl, Mizoram. Then in Mangaluru, which faced a similar kind of mishap in 2010, where again the aircraft overshot the runway. And then obviously Kozhikode, and then in the vicinity of India, Kathmandu and Paro Airport also have tabletop runways. Let us now solve the question of the day for yesterday. The question was, with reference to phase 2 of the FAME scheme, consider the following statements. The scheme provides for the demand incentive to the consumers in the form of upfront reduced purchase price of electric vehicles, which is correct. It provides incentives only for public transport and commercial vehicles, which is incorrect. And also, the scheme is not being implemented by Niti Aayog, and hence the right answer is A, 1 only. Whereas the question of the day for today is, consider the following statements. Statement 1. Formation of Quad, that is Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, took place in the aftermath of rise of China after the global financial meltdown of 2008. Statement 2. Quad group has an agreement of supporting a member nation with military help in case it is at war with an aggressive power. Select the correct option. A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, D, none of the above.